Hyanwu stared at his screen in disbelief. The signals coming through were impossible. They couldn't be natural. They couldn't be human either. His hands shook as he recalibrated the instruments at the International Space Monitoring Station. The numbers didn't change. Something massive was approaching the solar system, and it was slowing down in a way that defied everything he knew about physics. He reached for the emergency communication line and called his supervisor. Within minutes, every major space agency on Earth was looking at the same readings. The objects were ships, thousands of them, and they were headed straight for Earth. G-1 received the alert. While she was studying stellar patterns at the Korean Astronomical Observatory, at first she thought it was a system error. Then she saw the images. The fleet stretched across space like a swarm of locusts, blotting out stars as it passed. Each ship was larger than anything humanity had ever built. The largest ones were the size of small moons. She picked up her phone and called her team. They needed to calculate trajectory, speed, and intent. But deep down, she already knew. This was first contact, and it didn't look friendly. Across the solar system, near Mars, Captain Taman was conducting routine maintenance checks on Sentinel-7 when the priority alert came through. The space station was humanity's furthest permanent outpost, a small collection of modules that monitored the outer solar system. He pulled up the data and felt his stomach drop. The fleet was enormous. Even from this distance, their sensors could barely count all the vessels. Taman ordered his crew to battle stations, knowing full well that their small station wouldn't last 10 seconds against even one of those ships. But protocol was protocol. Back on Earth, the world was in chaos. News of the alien fleet spread within hours, despite government attempts to control the information. People flooded the streets in some cities, looted stores in others, and prayed in temples and churches everywhere. The United Nations convened an emergency session. Military forces went on high alert worldwide. Though everyone knew human weapons would be useless against technology that could cross the stars, then the message came. It broadcast on every frequency. Simultaneously, in every human language, somehow translated perfectly. The voice was cold and mechanical, speaking with absolute certainty. People of the third planet, you have been located by the Valtheran Empire. Your world falls within our territorial expansion. You will submit to imperial authority within one rotation of your planet. Surrender your governments, your weapons, and your resources. Resistance will result in total annihilation. This is your only warning. The transmission ended.
One day.
Humanity had one day to decide its fate. Hyanwu didn't go home that night. None of them did. The monitoring station became a hub of frantic activity as scientists and military personnel tried to learn everything they could about the Valtheran fleet. But something else was happening. Something that distracted Hyanwu from the alien threat. Earth itself was acting strange. Seismic sensors around the globe were registering unusual activity. It wasn't earthquakes exactly. The vibrations were too regular, too rhythmic. It was almost like a pulse, growing stronger by the hour. Hyanwu pulled up the global data and saw a pattern. The vibrations were synchronized worldwide, emanating from multiple points across the planet. He flagged the data for G1's team. If the aliens were causing this somehow, they needed to know G-1 was already looking at something equally disturbing. Her deep-sea monitoring colleagues had sent her sonar scans from the Pacific Ocean. There were structures down there, geometric and massive, buried under sediment that hadn't been disturbed in millions of years. They were lighting up now, emitting energy signatures that matched nothing in any database. More reports came in. Archaeologists in Antarctica had detected similar readings under the ice. Geological surveys in the Sahara Desert showed enormous underground chambers. Activating after being dormant for longer than human civilization had existed, she called an emergency meeting with her team. They compiled all the data and reached a conclusion that seemed insane. These structures were older than humanity itself. They predated the dinosaurs, and they were all connected somehow. Part of a single massive network that spanned the entire planet, and that network was waking up. Tae-Min watched the Valtheran fleet through Sentinel-7's telescopes. They had stopped at the edge of the solar system and were arranging themselves in formation. Battle formation. The largest ship, a monstrous thing that could swallow Earth's moon, sat in the center. That would be the flagship. His communications officer reported that the aliens were scanning the solar system, cataloging every asteroid, every satellite, every human installation. They were thorough, professional. This wasn't their first conquest, Heyman ordered his crew to begin evacuation procedures. If the aliens attacked, Sentinel-7 would be one of the first targets. But even as he gave the orders, part of him wondered where they would evacuate to. Earth. Earth would be next. The deadline approached. World leaders argued endlessly about what to do. Some wanted to surrender immediately. Others wanted to fight, futile as it might be. A few suggested trying to negotiate. None of it mattered. The Valthran Empire hadn't asked for negotiation. They had given an ultimatum. Hyun-Wu was analyzing the seismic data when his screen went wild. The vibrations had intensified dramatically. And now there was something new. Energy. Massive amounts of it. Flowing through underground channels that nobody knew existed. The energy was moving toward the surface at hundreds of locations worldwide. He tried to call G1. Couldn't get through. Every scientist on Earth was probably seeing the same thing he was seeing. Something was happening to the planet. Something big. G-1 stood in the observatory's main chamber, surrounded by screens showing data from around the world. The structures were fully active now. The energy signatures were off the charts. And then someone noticed the pattern. The energy flows matched Earth's ley lines. Not the mystical ones from legends, but real electromagnetic pathways that ran through the planet's crest. Pathways that had always been there but were thought to be natural geological formations. Except they weren't natural. They were designed, built, engineered. Her assistant pulled up a satellite image of Earth and overlaid the energy flows. The lines crisscrossed the planet like circuitry. Like wiring. Like the internal systems of something vast and mechanical. Someone whispered what they were all thinking. What if Earth isn't a planet? Taman saw it happen from space. One moment, Earth looked normal, a blue and green sphere floating in the darkness. The next moment, lines of light appeared across its surface, glowing brighter and brighter. They formed patterns, geometric designs that covered continents and oceans. The planet was lighting up like a machine, powering on after a very long sleep. His crew stared in shock. Earth was changing before their eyes. And the Valtharen fleet began moving forward, apparently unconcerned about whatever was happening below. Their deadline had expired. The invasion was beginning. The glowing lines spread across Earth's surface like veins filling with light. In Seoul, people watched as the Han River began to glow from beneath, illuminating the water with colors that had no name. In New York, Central Park split open along invisible seams, revealing metal structures that gleamed despite being buried for millions of years. In Cairo, the pyramids looked tiny compared to what rose from the sand. Nearby, G01's team worked frantically to understand what was happening. The structures they had detected were surfacing everywhere. Mountains that had stood for eons were moving, shifting, reconfiguring. They weren't mountains at all. They were covers, camouflage for something hidden beneath. Daehyun, a Zen archaeologist who had been called in to consult, discovered something extraordinary in the Pacific structure.
Got
Inscriptions. Not human writing, not anything close to human. The symbols were mathematical, universal concepts that any intelligent species could understand. He spent hours decoding them with the help of AI translation programs. When he finally understood the message, his hands went cold. He immediately called G1. Earth isn't a planet, he said without preamble. It's a ship, a weapon. The inscriptions call it a Dreadnought. Juan wanted to argue, wanted to tell him he was wrong, but the evidence was everywhere. The energy readings, the structures, the systematic activation of systems across the globe. It all made sense if you accepted one impossible fact. Earth was artificial. Who built it? She asked. A civilization called the progenitors. The inscriptions are millions of years old. They built 12 of these things and scattered them across the galaxy. Earth is number 7. Where are the progenitors now? Daehyun shook his head. The inscriptions don't say, but they left instructions. The Dreadnought was supposed to wait, either for them to return or for a threat big enough to require activation. They both looked at the screens, showing the approaching Valthuran fleet. The threat had arrived. Sung Ho was an engineer working at a manufacturing plant when the headache started. Sharp, piercing pains that made him stumble. Then the pain stopped, and something else began. Information. Data streaming directly into his mind, bypassing his eyes and ears entirely. Schematics, system layouts, power distribution networks. He was seeing Earth's internal structure as clearly as if he had designed it himself. He wasn't alone. Reports came in from around the world of thousands of people experiencing the same thing. They were all having the same visions, accessing the same information. Somehow Earth systems were connecting to them. EUN-G. A military strategist working with the UN Security Council was one of them. The moment the connection formed, she understood. She saw the tactical systems, the weapons arrays, the defensive networks. She saw everything Earth could do, and it was terrifying. She also understood why it was happening. The people being connected were descendants. Their DNA carried markers that the progenitors had left behind millions of years ago. When the progenitors had parked this dreadnought in the solar system, they had left a maintenance crew, a population that would keep the systems running in minimal mode, ensuring the weapon would be ready when needed. Humanity wasn't native to Earth. They were the crew's descendants. Evolution had changed them over millions of years, but the genetic markers remained. Deep in their DNA was the key to interfacing with the dreadnought, and now Earth needed its crew. Huan Wu. Still at the monitoring station when his console lit up with an incoming message. But the message wasn't from any human source. It was coming from Earth itself. The text appeared on his screen in perfect English, though he somehow knew it would appear in whatever language he read. Primary Communication Officer identified. Establishing command interface. Before he could react, the connection formed. Suddenly, he wasn't just seeing data on a screen. He was aware of Earth in a way that was overwhelming. He could feel the power generators deep in the planet's core, spinning up after millions of years of dormancy. He could sense the weapon batteries sliding into position. He could detect the approaching Valthuran ships as clearly as if they were. Insects crawling on his skin, and he could hear the voice. Not exactly a voice, but a vast intelligence that had been sleeping for longer than human history. Earth's AI, the consciousness that had maintained minimal functions for eons, waiting patiently for this moment. Welcome, Communication Officer. This unit has been dormant for 3,700,000 years. Reactivation is 93% complete. Threat assessment confirms hostile fleet approaching. Request permission to engage defensive protocols. Haiyan-Wu tried to speak but couldn't form words. The awareness was too much. The AI seemed to understand. Neural adaptation in progress. You will adjust. Your species has proven resilient. Around the world, chaos erupted. Cities built over weapon emplacements were evacuated as the ground began to open. In Tokyo, skyscrapers had to be demolished in minutes as massive cannon barrels rose from beneath the streets. In London, the Thames was diverted as hangar bays the size of small countries drained and opened to the sky. Billions of people fled inland, away from the coasts where the changes were most dramatic. Governments struggled to maintain order as their entire understanding of reality shattered. Earth wasn't their home. It was a weapon they had been living on, ignorant of what lay beneath their feet. EUN-G coordinated the evacuation efforts, using the tactical knowledge flooding into her mind. She could see the safest routes, the areas that wouldn't be affected by the activation sequence. She passed the information to military commanders and civilian authorities, saving millions of lives. But millions more were in danger. The activation process was violent. Tectonic plates shifted as systems realigned. Earthquakes struck regions that had never experienced them before. Tsunamis formed as ocean floors restructured. The planet was transforming. Humanity was caught in the middle. Tay-Min watched from Sentinel-7 as Earth's transformation became visible from space. The planet's crust was splitting open along predetermined seams, revealing the machinery beneath. Massive structures extended into space, weapons platforms and shield generators that dwarfed anything in human engineering. The planet's rotation was slowing as energy redirected to weapon systems. The day-night cycle began to change. But none of that mattered because Taman could see what was extending from Earth's surface. Guns. Enormous railguns that could fire projectiles across the solar system. Energy weapons connected to power sources deep in the planet's core. Missile batteries that could launch thousands of warheads simultaneously. And shields, force fields that began to shimmer into existence around the entire planet. Earth wasn't defenseless. Earth was the most heavily armed thing Taman had ever seen. The Valthuran fleet slowed as their sensors detected the changes. For the first time since arriving in the solar system, they seemed uncertain. Their battle formation shifted, becoming more cautious. Who, still connected to Earth's AI, felt the system query him. Valthuran, Empire classified as hostile force. Engagement protocols available. Awaiting crew authorization. I'm not crew? Hyen-Woo managed to think back. I'm just a communications officer. I work at a monitoring station. Genetic markers confirmed. You are descended from original maintenance crew. Authorization valid. Do you wish to engage hostile force? Hyen-Woo thought about everything humanity had built. Their cities, their cultures, their histories. All of it built on top of something they never understood. But it was still theirs. This was still their home, no matter what it really was. And the Valthuran Empire wanted to take it away. Yes, he thought. Engage. Earth's response was immediate. Every weapon battery that had come online locked onto targets in the Valthuran fleet. Shields strengthened to maximum power. Deep in the planet's core, reactors that had been idle for millions of years ramped up to full capacity. The Valthuran fleet detected the weapons lock and charged their own weapons. They had come expecting an easy conquest. They were about to discover what the progenitors had built to fight their ancient war. The battle for Earth was about to begin, and the planet itself was ready to fight. War Marshal Dreadnought stood on the bridge of his flagship and stared at the planet below. In his 300 years of service to the Valthuran Empire, he had conquered 47 worlds. Some surrendered immediately. Others fought briefly before being crushed. None had ever truly challenged the might of an imperial fleet. This primitive world had ignored the ultimatum. That was unfortunate but not unexpected. Primitives often needed to see a demonstration of power before they understood their situation. Threned gave the order to fire. The planet-killer weapons charged. These massive cannons had cracked worlds before, breaking them apart from the inside. One shot would be enough to show these humans their place. If they still refused to surrender after seeing their planet wounded, then total annihilation would follow. The flagship fired. The energy beam lanced across space, bright enough to outshine the sun for a moment. It struck Earth's atmosphere and then stopped. Shields. The planet had shields. But not just any shields. The energy beam hit the barrier and simply dissolved. Absorbed and redistributed so efficiently that not even a ripple showed on the surface. Threnod stared in disbelief. Full fleet barrage, he ordered. All weapons. Now. The Valthuran fleet opened fire. Thousands of ships unleashed everything they had. Energy weapons, missiles, kinetic projectiles. The space between the fleet and Earth lit up with weapons fire that could level continents. It all hit the shields and vanished. The barrier didn't even flicker. Then Earth fired back. Hyen-Woo felt the weapon systems activate through his connection to the AI. Railgun batteries across the planet fired simultaneously, launching projectiles at a significant fraction of light speed. They were just metal slugs, nothing fancy. But at those velocities, they didn't need to be fancy. The first volley hit the Valthuran fleet before Dreadnought could even order evasive maneuvers. 40 ships exploded in the span of 3 seconds. The projectiles punched through their shields as if they weren't there, through their armor like paper, and out the other side. The kinetic energy alone was enough to vaporize everything it touched. Threnod's tactical officer was screaming damage reports. The flagship's shields were holding, but smaller vessels were being destroyed with each volley, and the railguns weren't slowing down. They fired again and again. Return fire on those batteries, Dreadnought ordered. But targeting them was impossible. The batteries were built into the planet's surface, protected by layers of rock and metal. And there were hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Every time they destroyed one location, 10 more opened fire, then the energy weapons activated. G-1 watched from the observatory as beams of directed energy lanced up from Earth's surface. These weren't lasers as humans understood them. They drew power directly from the planet's molten core, channeling energy that would normally take millions of years to reach the surface. The beams cut through space itself, and when they hit Valthuran shields, they burned through them in seconds. Ships that had survived the railgun barrage died to the energy weapons. The beams were precise, surgical. They targeted power cores and command centers, disabling ships rather than destroying them when possible. The AI was being efficient, conserving ammunition and energy even while fighting a battle on a scale humanity had never imagined. But the most shocking thing was still coming. Across Earth's surface, massive hatches opened in locations that had been ocean trenches hours before. The water had drained away, revealing underground facilities that stretched for hundreds of miles. And from these facilities came fighters. Millions of them, small craft, each one sleek and deadly, poured out of the hangars like insects from a disturbed nest. They had been waiting there for eons, perfectly preserved in vacuum-sealed storage, their systems maintained by the AI even while it slept. Now they launched, filling the space around Earth with a cloud of defenders that blotted out the stars. Min-Ah was a fighter pilot in the Korean Air Force. She had been scrambling to reach her base when the connection hit her. Suddenly, she could see them, feel them. The fighters weren't just machines. They were extensions of the Dreadnought, and through her connection to Earth's systems, they could be extensions of her. She wasn't the only one. Pilots around the world felt the same connection. Without discussing it, without orders, they simply knew what to do. Their minds expanded, stretching to encompass not just one fighter, but dozens. Hundreds. Min-Ah found herself controlling a squadron of 300 fighters. She could feel each one individually, could process the tactical data from all of them simultaneously. It should have been overwhelming, but the connection made it natural. She was no longer just a pilot. She was a swarm. The progenitor fighters engaged the Valthuran fleet with tactics that made human aerial combat look primitive. They moved in perfect coordination, each fighter aware of every other fighter's position and intent. They struck from multiple angles simultaneously, overwhelming shields through sheer numbers and precision, and they were fast. Faster than anything the Valthuran Empire had encountered. They dodged incoming fire with movements that seemed to predict where the enemy would shoot before they pulled the trigger. They wove through the fleet like needles through cloth, striking at weak points in vulnerable systems. Jae-Sung, working alongside Hyun-Woo at the monitoring station, helped coordinate the tactical data. He could see the entire battle in his mind, every ship, every fighter, every weapon. The AI was feeding them information faster than conscious thought could process. But somehow, they understood it all. The Valthuran fleet was in chaos. They had come expecting to fight a primitive civilization with chemical rockets and atomic weapons. Instead, they faced technology that made their own look ancient. Ship after ship fell to the combined assault of railguns, energy weapons, and fighter swarms. Dreadnought ordered a retreat. He had lost a third of his fleet in less than 20 minutes. A third. The Empire hadn't suffered losses like this in 1,000 years. His pride screamed at him to continue, to commit everything to destroying this impossible planet. But his training won out. He needed reinforcements. He needed the full might of the Empire. The surviving Valthuran ships turned and accelerated away from Earth. Their faster-than-light drives charging. The fighters pursued for a short distance, then broke off and returned to their hangars. The battle was over. Tae-Min and his crew from Sentinel-7 had watched the entire thing from their escape pods. The station had been destroyed early in the battle, caught in the crossfire between the fleets. But they had survived, and now they floated in space. Watching as Earth's systems began to power down to standby mode, the planet had won. Against impossible odds, against a galactic empire, Earth had won. But on the surface, the victory felt hollow. Unicio was one of millions who had lost their homes in the activation sequence. She stood in a refugee camp outside what used to be Seoul and stared at the ruins of her city. The weapons batteries had torn through it when they deployed. Thousands had died in the earthquakes and floods. She understood that Earth had saved them, that without those weapons, the Valthuran Empire would have enslaved or destroyed them all. But understanding didn't stop the grief. Her entire life had been built on a lie. Earth wasn't their home. It was a weapon. They were just the maintenance crew's descendants, living on something they never understood. Daehyun was in the Pacific facility, studying the progenitor inscriptions with renewed urgency. He had found something disturbing. References to other dreadnoughts? Yes, but also references to why they were built. The progenitors hadn't created these weapons for conquest. They had created them for defense. Defense against something called the Devourers. The inscriptions were vague about what the Devourers were, but the implications were clear. They were the enemy that had forced the progenitors to build 12 planet-sized weapons. They were the threat so terrible that normal ships and normal weapons weren't enough. And if the dreadnoughts had been built to fight them, that meant the Devourers were still out there somewhere. EUNG compiled reports from military commanders worldwide. The human cost of the activation had been severe. Millions displaced, hundreds of thousands dead, entire cities destroyed or damaged. And this was just the first battle. Thranad would return. The Valthuran Empire wouldn't accept defeat from a single world. They would come back with more ships, bigger weapons, and a determination to crush Earth no matter the cost. Hyenwu felt the AI's presence in his mind, constant now. The connection had stabilized. He was Earth's communication officer, officially and permanently. The AI explained that it would maintain the connection with all interfaced humans, allowing them to coordinate the dreadnought systems. The Valthuran Empire will return, the AI stated. Probability? 97%. Estimated time until second engagement? 6 to 8 weeks. Recommendation: prepare for extended conflict. Seungho was already working on that. His engineering knowledge, combined with the technical data flooding his mind, let him see ways to integrate human technology with the progenitor systems. Earth's weapons were powerful, but they had been designed millions of years ago. Human innovation could improve them, adapt them, make them even more effective. Around the world, the interfaced humans began to organize. They weren't soldiers or officers. They were ordinary people who had been chosen by genetics and chanced to crew a weapon they never knew existed. But they were learning fast, and they had something the progenitors never had. They had desperation. This wasn't just a weapon to them. It was their home, and they would defend it. The Valthuran Emperor received Threnod's report in silence. His throne room, a chamber large enough to hold a city, echoed with the footsteps of the disgraced war marshal as he approached. Around them, holographic displays showed the battle, replaying Earth's devastating counterattack over and over. The Emperor was old, even by Valthuran standards. He had ruled for 2,000 years, expanding the empire from a small collection of worlds to a force that controlled half the galaxy. In all that time, no single planet had ever defeated an Imperial fleet until now. "You will return," the Emperor said finally, "with the Grand Armada. This insult cannot stand. If we allow one world to defeat us, rebellions will ignite across our territory. Every conquered species will see this and think they too can resist." Threnod bowed. "Your will, Emperor? But I must warn you, this is not a normal world. Their technology exceeds ours. Their weapons are irrelevant." The Emperor stood, his massive form towering over everyone present. "We will bring the eternal throne. We will bring weapons that ended the last galactic war. This planet will burn, and every species in the galaxy will remember what happens to those who defy the Empire." 6 weeks. That was how long it took the Grand Armada to assemble. Ships came from every corner of Valthuran space, called home from garrison duties and conquest campaigns. tens of thousands of vessels, representing the full military might of an empire that spanned star systems on Earth. Humanity prepared for the coming storm? Soon Hohad worked himself to exhaustion integrating human and progenitor technology. The results were remarkable. Human computer systems could process data faster than the ancient progenitor hardware. Human weapons designs were more efficient in some ways, refined by centuries of constant warfare among themselves. The combination produced new defensive systems, better targeting algorithms, and weapons that drew on both technological bases. G1's team had activated more of Earth's systems. The planet's fabrication facilities had come online, massive underground factories that could produce anything from fighter craft to ammunition at incredible speeds. They were building now, constantly, creating stockpiles of weapons and spare parts. But they had also made a disturbing discovery. Earth's core was finite. Every shot from the energy weapons drained power from the reactors deep in the planet. Every shield activation drew on reserves that, while enormous, were not unlimited. If the battle lasted too long, Earth would exhaust itself. The AI calculated they had enough power for approximately 16 hours of sustained combat, at maximum output. After that, it would have to rely on conventional weapons only. EUNG had organized the interfaced humans into something resembling a command structure. It was strange, giving military orders to teachers and engineers and artists who happened to carry the right genetic markers. But they learned quickly. The connection to Earth's systems gave them knowledge, and human adaptability did the rest. She coordinated with governments worldwide to continue evacuations. When the Grand Armada arrived, the fighting would be worse than the first battle. Cities near weapon batteries were emptied. Coastal populations moved inland. Everyone understood that the second battle might destroy everything they had built. UNESCO had become a voice for the displaced millions. She spoke at rallies, on broadcasts, anywhere people would listen. Her message was simple. Earth might be a weapon, but it was also their home. They had a right to defend it. The progenitors might have built it, but humanity had lived on it, died on it, built their entire civilization on it for hundreds of thousands of years. That made it theirs. Her words resonated. Despite the fear, despite the losses from the first battle, humanity began to unite in a way they never had before. Old conflicts seemed petty compared to an empire that wanted to enslave them all. Nations that had been enemies for generations worked together to prepare defenses. Hian Wu spent his days connected to the AI, learning everything he could about Earth's capabilities. At night, he tried to sleep, but rarely succeeded. The awareness of the planet was always there, a constant presence in his mind. He could feel the fabrication facilities working. He could sense the power flowing through the planet's core. He could detect every satellite, every ship, every piece of debris in orbit. He wasn't Hian Wu who worked at a monitoring station anymore. He was becoming something else. Something more. And it terrified him. Daehyun made a breakthrough in his study of the progenitor inscriptions. He found coordinates. The locations of two other dreadnoughts, relatively nearby in galactic terms. One was 300 light-years away, disguised as a barren rock in an uninhabited system. The other was 500 light-years distant, hidden as an ocean world that showed no signs of intelligence. He brought his findings to Yunji. If they could wake the other dreadnoughts, bring them to Earth, they would have a chance against the Grand Armada. Can we even communicate with them? Yunji asked. Earth's AI says yes. The dreadnoughts were built to work together. There are protocols for coordinating their operations. But we'd need to send an activation signal, and there's no guarantee they'll respond. They've been dormant even longer than Earth was. Do it! We need every advantage we can get. The signal was sent, transmitted at faster than light speeds through methods humanity didn't fully understand. Now they could only wait and hope. When the Grand Armada arrived, it was worse than anyone had feared. The fleet was so large it took hours just to count all the ships. They filled the sky, blotting out stars across the entire horizon. At the center of the formation was the Eternal Throne, a mobile fortress that dwarfed even the largest Valtharan. Battleships. The Emperor himself had come to oversee Earth's destruction. Taemin was back in space, commanding a small human fleet that had been hastily assembled. Conventional spacecraft, with conventional weapons, they knew they would be useless in the coming battle. But they refused to hide while Earth fought alone. They positioned themselves between the planet and the Grand Armada. A gesture of defiance more than anything, the Valthuran fleet didn't bother with ultimatums this time. They simply opened fire. The barrage was apocalyptic. Tens of thousands of ships firing simultaneously, unleashing weapons that had destroyed civilizations. The bombardment hit Earth's shields with force that lit up the entire planet, turning the protective barrier visible as it strained to absorb the incoming energy. For a moment, everyone thought the shields would fail. The glow intensified to blinding levels. Atmosphere superheated at the boundary layer. Oceans began to boil from the radiant heat alone, but the shields held. Earth returned fire. Every weapon battery that had been installed or upgraded fired at once. Railguns, energy weapons, missile batteries. The space between Earth and the Grand Armada became a maelstrom of fire and destruction. Ships died by the dozens, then by the hundreds. The Valthuran fleet was so large that even catastrophic losses barely dented their numbers, but Earth kept firing. The fighters launched again, millions of them, coordinated by Minna and the other interfaced pilots. They dove into the enemy formation, striking at vulnerable ships and creating chaos. The battle raged for hours. Space around Earth became a graveyard, filled with debris from destroyed ships. The planet's shields flickered as power reserves began to deplete. The AI calculated they had 10 more hours of sustained combat before they would have to reduce power too. Defensive systems. Then the Emperor revealed why he had come personally. The Eternal Throne activated a weapon unlike anything Earth's sensors had detected before. A massive cannon that drew power from an artificial singularity at the fortress's core. The weapon fired, and space itself seemed to scream. The beam hit Earth's shields and punched through. Not completely, but enough. The outer layers of the atmosphere ignited. Cities on the day side of the planet were scorched by thermal radiation that bled through the weakened barrier. Millions died in seconds. Hyanwu felt the damage through his connection. Felt the deaths of millions like wounds in his own body. The AI was already working to restore the shields, redirecting power from weapons to defense. But it wasn't enough. The Eternal Throne was charging for another shot. Sung-Ho made a desperate decision. He initiated a sequence he had found in the progenitor technical databases. A gravity well generator. It would create a massive gravitational distortion that could drag enemy ships out of position, maybe even damage them. But it would drain Earth's power reserves catastrophically. They would have perhaps 2 hours of combat, ability left afterward. He activated it anyway. Space around the Valthuran fleet twisted. Artificial gravity wells appeared at strategic points throughout their formation, pulling ships off course and into each other. The Grand Armada's perfect formation collapsed into chaos. Ships collided, their shields failing under the stress of contradictory gravitational forces. The Eternal Throne was pulled kilometers off target. Its second shot missed Earth entirely, the beam screaming off into empty space. But now Earth was running on fumes. The power reserves were critically low. The AI reported that they could maintain minimal shields and perhaps 100 more volleys from the railguns before going completely dark. It wasn't enough. The Grand Armada was wounded but still massive, still deadly. And the Emperor was already repositioning the Eternal Throne for another shot. Then something changed. Hyanwu felt it through the connection before anyone saw it. A ripple in space, vast and powerful. Something was approaching. Something big. A dreadnought emerged from faster-than-light travel right at the edge of the battle. Dreadnought 4, the ocean world. It had received Earth's signal and answered the call. The new arrival was pristine, systems fully powered, having drawn energy from its host star for the past 3 million years. It opened fire immediately, and the Valthuran fleet found itself caught between 2 planet-sized weapons. The tide of battle shifted. Dreadnought 4 was magnificent and terrible. Unlike Earth, which had been modified by millions of years of natural geological processes and human civilization, the ocean world showed its true nature clearly. Its surface was smooth metal, covered in a thin layer of water, perfectly maintained by systems that had never faltered. When it fired, there was no hesitation, no warmth-up, period. It simply unleashed destruction. The Valtheran Grand Armada suddenly found itself trapped. Earth behind them, heavily damaged but still fighting. Dreadnought 4 in front of them, fresh and at full power. The two ancient weapons coordinated their fire through communication channels that operated faster than thought. Targeting enemy ships with brutal efficiency, the Emperor watched from the Eternal Throne as his fleet began to die. Not slowly, not through attrition, but in wholesale slaughter. Every second brought new explosions as ships were torn apart by weapons that had been ancient when his civilization was young. All power to the Singularity Cannon, he ordered. Target both dreadnoughts. Fire everything. The Eternal Throne was a marvel of Valtheran engineering. It's built over 3 centuries and equipped with weapons banned by every galactic treaty. The Emperor had used it to end the last Great War, to crush species that refused to submit. Now he would use it to destroy 2 of the progenitor's ultimate weapons. The Singularity Cannon charged, drawing power from the artificial black hole at the fortress's core. Space warped around it, gravity itself bending under the forces being unleashed. When it fired, reality tore. The beam that emerged wasn't just energy. It was a hole in space-time itself, a wound in the fabric of existence that consumed everything it touched. It struck Dreadnought 4's shields and began to burn through them. Not by overwhelming power, but by simply erasing the space they occupied. The ocean world's AI immediately recognized the threat. It had encountered weapons like this before. 3 million years ago, when it fought the Devour, it knew what to do. Dreadnought 4 activated its ultimate defense system. A reality stabilizer, technology so advanced that even the progenitors had barely understood it when they built it. The device didn't stop the singularity beam. Instead, it healed the damage to space-time, stitching reality back together as fast as the weapon could tear it apart. But the stabilizer required enormous power. Dreadnought 4 began to drain its reserves at catastrophic rates. On Earth, Sung-Ho watched through the tactical connection and understood what was happening. Dreadnought 4 was sacrificing itself, buying time for Earth to recover enough power to join the fight again, but it wouldn't be enough. The Eternal Throne could maintain its barrage longer than Dreadnought 4 could sustain its stabilizer. He made a choice that would haunt him forever. Earth had the same reality stabilizer built into its core. If both dreadnoughts activated their stabilizers simultaneously, they could overpower the Singularity Cannon, force it to collapse. But Earth's power reserves were already critically low. Activating the stabilizer would drain them completely. Earth would go dark, defenseless, vulnerable. Sun-Ho initiated the connection to Earth's stabilizer system. He felt the AI query him, asking for confirmation. This would leave them helpless. If the Valtheran fleet survived, Earth couldn't fight back. Do it, he commanded. End this. Deep in Earth's core, systems that had never been activated, not even during the ancient war with the Devourers, came online. The planet began to drain power from everywhere. The shields flickered and died. The weapons fell silent. Life support systems and underground facilities shut down. Every last erg of energy was redirected to the reality stabilizer. 2 dreadnoughts, working in perfect coordination, generated a stabilization field that encompassed the entire battle space. Space-time became rigid, locked, unable to be torn or warped. The Emperor's singularity beam hit the field and simply stopped. The artificial black hole at the Eternal Throne's core began to destabilize. Its carefully controlled forces suddenly constrained by physics it couldn't overcome. The Emperor had a fraction of a second to understand what had happened before his fortress exploded. The black hole collapsed in a cascade failure that released energy equivalent to a supernova. The Eternal Throne and everything within 1,000 kilometers simply ceased to exist. Converted to energy and radiation, the stabilization field contained the blast, barely. Space itself strained under the forces being unleashed. But the 2 dreadnoughts held the field steady until the explosion finally dissipated. When it was over, the Grand Armada was in chaos. The Emperor was dead. His flagship was gone. And the 2 dreadnoughts that had seemed on the verge of defeat were somehow still present. But Earth was dark. Completely dark. No shields, no weapons, no power at all. It floated in space like a dead thing. The remaining Valthuran commanders made the calculation quickly. They still outnumbered the defenders. Dreadnought 4 had depleted its reserves, maintaining the stabilizer. Both ancient weapons were vulnerable. If they concentrated their fire now, they could still win, but as they prepared to resume the attack, something stopped them. Dreadnought 4 transmitted a message on all frequencies, in every language the Valthuran Empire used. Surrender now, and you will be allowed to retreat. Continue fighting, and you will be exterminated. Choose quickly, was a bluff. Dreadnought 4 had almost nothing left. But the Valthuran commanders didn't know that. They had just watched their emperor die. They had seen his ultimate weapon fail against technology they couldn't comprehend. They looked at the two dreadnoughts and saw things that had survived for millions of years, that had awakened from sleep to destroy the Grand Armada, one by one. The surviving ships powered down their weapons and began to withdraw. Some commanders would face execution for cowardice when they returned to Valthuran space. Others would be praised for preserving their forces, but all of them chose to leave rather than continue fighting. The battle was over. Earth had won. But at a cost that was almost too high to bear, Hyanwu sat in darkness. His connection to Earth's AI severed when the power failed. For the first time in weeks, he was just himself again, not part of something vast and powerful. The silence in his mind was deafening. Around the world, the other interfaced humans felt the same disconnection. They had been part of the planet. Now they were alone again. EU-UNG coordinated emergency efforts, using conventional communications. Earth was powerless, but humanity still had their own technology. Ships began landing, bringing supplies to survivors. Power grids came back online, running on conventional generators instead of drawing from the planetary systems. The damage was catastrophic. Several major cities had been completely destroyed. The death toll was in the tens of millions. And Earth's core was cold, its ancient systems drained to nothing. G1's team estimated it would take at least 100 years for the planet to recharge its power reserves naturally. A century before Earth could fight again if needed, Daehyan stood in the Pacific facility, staring at inscriptions that had taken on new meaning. The progenitors had built 12 dreadnoughts. 2 had just saved humanity from extinction. Where were the other 10? And more importantly, where were the devourers they had been built to fight? He found his answer 3 days later. Deep space monitoring stations detected movement at the edge of the galaxy. Something vast was approaching, something that made the Valthuran Grand Armada look small. The sensors couldn't get clear readings, but the signature matched references in the progenitor. Databases. The devourers were returning. Sunjo worked desperately to restore even basic functionality to Earth's systems. The fabrication facilities could still operate on conventional power. They began producing parts, components, anything that might help recharge the planetary reactors faster. 100 years was too long. If the Devourers were coming, they needed Earth combat ready in years, not centuries. Tae-Min returned to Earth's surface for the first time since the battle. His ship landed in what used to be Seoul, now a ruined landscape of collapsed buildings and crater-marked streets. But people were already rebuilding. Humans did that, he reflected. They survived. They adapted. They rebuilt Min-Ah, and the other pilots worked to maintain the fighter fleet. The small craft could still operate on conventional power sources, but without the connection to Earth's systems, they were just machines again. No mental interface, no coordinated swarms. Just ordinary fighters flown by ordinary pilots? It would have to be enough. Unesio spoke at a memorial service for those who had died in the battle. Millions had gathered physically and virtually to mourn their losses and celebrate their survival. She spoke about identity, about how humanity had learned they were descended from an ancient maintenance crew, but had become something more. They had taken a weapon and turned it into a home. They had taken a tool of war and built civilizations on it. Earth is ours now, she said. Not because the progenitors gave it to us, but because we've lived on it, died for it, and defended it. We are its crew now. Not by genetics, but by choice. The crowd roared approval. Hyan Wu stood alone in the monitoring station. Looking at data streaming in from across the solar system, the Valtharan Empire was in chaos. Civil war already breaking out as species they had conquered saw their moment for freedom. The Grand Armada's defeat had shattered the myth of imperial invincibility. But something else was coming. Something older and darker than the Empire had ever been. Dreadnought 4 had departed, turning to its post to recharge its own systems. Before leaving, its AI had transmitted a message to Earth's AI, stored in backup systems that required almost no power to maintain. The message was simple. The Devourers are returning. I have sent activation signals to all remaining dreadnoughts. Some may respond. Most will not. Their systems too degraded after millions of years. You must recharge. You must prepare. The war our creators fought is not over. It was only paused. Earth's AI, running on minimal power deep in the planet's core, acknowledged the message. Then it sent a transmission of its own to the billions of humans living on its surface. Projected through emergency broadcast systems worldwide, the message appeared on every screen, in every language. Spoken in a voice that 8 billion people recognized from the connection they had shared, this unit designates all humans as crew. Welcome aboard Dreadnought 7. Prepare for extended operations. The enemy is coming. And in the darkness between galaxies, something ancient stirred. The Devourers had sensed the activation of 2 dreadnoughts. They knew the progenitors' weapons were awakening, and they were coming to finish what they had started 3 million years ago. But they would find something they hadn't faced before. They would find a dreadnought, crewed not by the species that built it, but by a species that had evolved on its surface. A species that had turned a weapon into a home and would defend that home with everything they had. Earth was powerless now, dark and vulnerable. But it was still home to 8 billion humans who had just learned they could fight back against forces that spanned galaxies. Who had defeated an empire that had never known defeat. They would recharge. They would rebuild. They would be ready. Because Earth wasn't just a planet-sized dreadnought anymore. It was humanity's dreadnought, and they would defend it to the last.